down, probably 20 minutes to go. We'll have the ability to take some questions, and you can raise your hand to ask them, or I can open up the chat and just read them out, whichever works best for you. But don't feel like you have to hold off on those until we are done. Let me pop my screen up and then we will go from there. Oh, disabled participant screen sharing. I think you have to give me permission to do this. Or make me a co-host. Sorry, guys, we were so busy talking about my Broadway shows that are opening that we forgot to actually check that I could do some screen sharing.
You should have it now.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Here we go. So this is probably not news to literally anyone, but we all can recognize that careers in life are not this beautiful straight line that goes up and to the right. And then in fact, it ends up looking a lot more twisty-turny along the way. And I've had several folks respond as I've given this talk over the last year saying, well, this is even like a best case scenario, that there might be versions of this that dips below the x-axis once or twice along the way. So we can all recognize that there are lots of kind of forces at play that can give us these curveballs. And part of this is because we're seeing writ large, disruption is becoming the new normal. These things, whether they're technological or ecological or biological, that used to be, call it once in a generation, once in a decade, they're becoming like once every third Tuesday at this point. There's just a lot going on all simultaneously that is continually throwing the world into a loop. But then when we couple that in with the fact that people are recognizing, especially after the pandemic, where we all got to sit still for far longer than was comfortable, people are recognizing that work and our relationship to work is not working for everyone. And so I came into this having this exact same realization myself, trying to piece together an answer to this question. Clay Christensen had been my professor and then my mentor for a decade before he passed. And on the last day of BSSE, Building and Sustaining a Successful Enterprise class, he asked us this question: how will you measure your life? And in this particular day, this particular class, it was especially poignant because he had just been diagnosed with brain cancer. And for a little while, at least, we thought this might be his last time ever teaching. We were very lucky he recovered from that. We got another 10 years with him. But in this moment, it felt incredibly important to be able to answer this. And as he pointed out, what we measure is what we manage. And the importance and the tools and the focus that he'd been giving us throughout the semester to think about how we would be managing our careers and managing our businesses, we could turn those tools to ourselves and think about how we wanted to measure and manage our lives. And I thought about this deeply because, as he pointed out, that these the things that are easiest to measure are not always the things that matter the most. Things like power and money and prestige, the number of people who report to you, the number of zeros in your bank account, those are easy to measure, but they don't actually sum up our lives very well. And that instead, thinking of a different set of measures around relationships, health, free time, growth, the enjoyment of our work might be better metrics to measure against. And I put this all together. This is work I've been doing for basically 15 years at this point, but I pulled it all together in the last few years under this title for the model called the portfolio life. And it's really based on and inspired by the idea of portfolio theory as you think about it from a financial perspective. We understand that for different chapters of our lives, we allocate our assets across different risk, different reward opportunities based on the needs for that chapter. And that as these chapters change and we need a different relationship to our finances, we rebalance our portfolios commensurately. And we could use that model to think about life, because as much as we have been trying to make work-life balance a thing, it's not ever worked This actual framework was developed in the 1980s by folks in the UK when they were trying to get more mothers into the workforce. It was a fake dichotomy then, and 40 years of research have basically proven that it doesn't work. This notion that work and life are in opposition to each other and that every minute given to one has to be taken from the other doesn't really work. And so instead, if you think about it from a portfolio perspective, you can see that your work is in the context of your life and that it has to take into account the other components of your life as you piece it all together to equate 100% of your time and attention and focus. So I want to offer this model for you today, along with a couple of takeaways on what this looks like when you think about managing teams and organizations, in addition to how you might be thinking about your own lives. And then we'll pull the slides down and we can have more of a conversation. So I want to introduce the 4 pillars of this model of the portfolio life. They're identity, optionality, diversification, and flexibility. And we'll go into each one. This model starts with identity. And this question, so, tell me about yourself. This has plagued me my entire life. As Edward mentioned, math and theater, double major in college, but even before college, this was relevant. I started playing piano at 4 years old, and I studied very seriously as a classical musician. I picked up cello in middle school. I added singing all the way through high school, and I thought I was going to go off and become a professional pianist. I was going to go off to Juilliard and do this professionally. And then I got to boarding school for the arts. And I realized in this moment that I didn't love practicing 6 hours a day in a studio. What I loved was the math team and student council and my Russian literature course, and that I actually wanted to go to college instead of conservatory. And so I made my first pivot there, going off to Emory, where I studied math and theater and minored in music, physics, and political science, because I really couldn't choose. I was interested in them all. And then I had to get a job when I graduated. And so I came out of that and was debating between a PhD in math or career in the arts. And I decided to move to New York and try the arts for a bit. I got a job at the Metropolitan Opera on the management side, realized I really liked the management side of things, and decided to go off to Harvard Business School to learn more about how to run organizations. And the plan had always been to return to the arts, to run the Kennedy Center someday. And then I got to business school, and my 3rd week in, Lehman Brothers collapsed. And it was the 2008 financial crisis, and there were no jobs, especially in the nonprofit arts sector. And so instead, I had to pivot. And I decided that entrepreneurship actually had a lot in common with what I loved about the arts. And so I went off and spent the next decade building tech startups, right? If I tell you this whole story about myself in kind of chronological narrative, you are likely, whether we're, in an interview or at a cocktail party or at a dinner, you are probably going to back away slowly and excuse yourself. And in your head, think, this chick is a hot mess. Can't make up her mind, constantly changing what she's focused on. None of these things seem to connect to each other. Like, she's a flake, she's a dilettante, and I'm going to go refill my drink and find someone else to talk to. But if I don't tell you all of this, if I just say, yeah, I'm a tech entrepreneur, I went to Harvard Business School, I look like every other founder that has come out of HBS in the last 15 years. Knowing this backstory, having this color on all the things I bring to the table is crucial to understanding what makes me stand out. And so I struggled with this question because in my identity, I've always felt this multidisciplinary urge. And I know that that's what makes me valuable on a team, in any room, but I struggled to figure out how to tell that story. And then, as I was fundraising for my first startup, I had to practice this a ton over and over at all these investor meetups. And finally, one night after, I will admit, a couple of glasses of wine, I just bust out this line, I'm Christina and I'm a human Venn diagram. And the investor I was talking to paused for a second and he said, interdisciplinary. Okay, tell me more. And I was like, oh, this might actually work. And so for the last, decade or plus, I have used this as a way to anchor the things that I care about, the worlds that I'm connected to, and the principles, the disciplines that I can bring together. And that crucially, it's not just that I'm connected to the arts, business, and technology world, but that I can sit at the intersection of them. And where they intersect is where there's opportunity for innovation. So I offer you this because identity becomes the backbone of the portfolio life. If you can recognize that you are more than one thing, you are not equivalent to your current title on LinkedIn, that you bring all these other experiences and interests to the table. If you are more than one thing, then it's not too hard to believe that you can do more than one thing. And that brings us to pillar 2, which is optionality. In doing my research for the book, I came across this illustration. This is only half of it. I'll show you the full illustration in a second. But I came across this illustration from an artist who blogs under the name Wait But Why. And I love this so much because I think most of us, at least those of us born in sort of the any amount of privilege, understand that when you are born, the sky is the limit. You know, you could be anybody. But that as you make choices, you close doors. And that while you could have been, I don't know, an astronaut or an NBA player when you were born, by today, wherever today is, that green dot and that vertical line, all of the multiverse of who you could have been is not relevant. You are who you are based on the choices you've made. And so I think many of us understand the options we had before today, but probably feel that going forward, we have a straight line ahead of us, or at the very least, a single line ahead of us. And I would like to disabuse you of that notion. I want to tell you about Robert Lang. He's a physicist and an origami artist. Now, Robert spent the first 20-some years of his career as a decorated, very prestigious and impressive laser physicist. He worked for NASA, JPL, for Spectra Diode Labs. He has patents and research papers and books out the wazoo. This man is a gifted engineer and laser physicist. And all along through this entire kind of period of science and engineering in his life, he's always loved origami. He got interested in it in the first grade when a teacher was trying to keep him entertained since he was done faster than all the other kids in the class. She gave him a book, she sent him to the corner, and he started learning how to fold things. And ever since then, he kept origami in his life as a hobby for the most part. He did it all the way through his PhD as a way to unwind at the end of every day. He did it as he moved into the professional world of physics as an opportunity to build a community. Turns out there's like a whole world of origami nerds. There's conferences and there's social events. And you're thinking origami, right? Like paper cranes. I need to be clear. When Robert Lang does origami, it looks like this. This is a man who knows how to fold paper. So when he got to the dot-com bust in 2001, when he shifted from making things in the course of his engineering jobs to laying other people off, and realized that getting out of bed every day to do that wasn't that exciting. When he had that realization and he turned to his wife and said, I don't want to be a physicist anymore. I want to be a professional origami artist. And bless her heart, she said, okay, I'll support you. Robert already had the momentum going to make this shift. So he switched. He made this big pivot and decided to become a professional origami artist. And among the components of that type of a career involved writing books and developing software using his computer programming skills, his math, his physics understanding to create really intricate patterns and really innovative lasers actually for etching the paper to help with the folds. He knew that this whole previous life as a physicist, it might not be relevant to his life as an origami artist, but he could still use those skills. And it turns out that doing so and getting that visibility about that whole first life that he had ended up unlocking what became the third chapter for Robert Lang. Because he got a call one day from a satellite team that was working to develop a new satellite that needed to be very small when it left Earth's orbit and that could unfold when it got out to space. And there were lots of complicating factors that were leading into this, but they heard that Robert Lang might be just the physicist and origami artist to help them pull this off. So he ended up working with them on this project. And in the course of doing this, started to realize and gain a reputation as the guy who could make really big things really small without cutting them, without creasing them. And there are more applications for that than you might believe. So what started out with satellites also suddenly became consulting for manufacturers of automobiles, trying to figure out new designs for airbags, for medical device companies trying to find ways to make devices really small when they needed to enter the human body, but then be able to expand in order to do surgeries once they're inside. That in this, Robert actually lived out all three, what I call business models of a portfolio life. In the beginning, he was a moonlighter. He had a day job as a physicist and he had a hobby on the side. He wasn't even monetizing it. It was just his hobby, but it gave him something, not just creativity, but community, growth, rest. It gave him something that mattered to him feeling like him. And then when he was ready for a pivot, when he wanted to zigzag, when he had this outside curveball of the economy making his day job no longer that appealing, he already had the momentum in place to make what on the surface looked like a really unconnected shift, but actually made a ton of sense once you knew about Robert's background. And then that set him up to be a multi-hyphenate, as he realized there were ways to merge those experiences and those communities from the first two chapters of his life in a way that put him on the vanguard, on the bleeding edge of innovation. Because Robert understood this, which is the full graphic, right? The full illustration shows that while you might think there's only one line that extends from where you are today, that's just not true. That unless you're dead, you still have options, but only if you can see them. And you're only going to be able to see them if you can start from an understanding that your identity is not limited to how you've been monetizing your time for the last decade or two or three. That everything you bring to the table is actually up for grabs as you think about how you want to craft what the next chapter of your life looks like. This becomes relevant because in a world constantly facing disruption, as we look at pillar 3, the only way to future-proof is to diversify. This is the great love of portfolio theory, that you can add risk to your portfolio, you can build in diversity and take advantage of all of these opportunities without fearing that a little bit of risk is going to crater your entire portfolio. That by having that diversification, you are protected. This becomes relevant as we think through not just breakfast choices in the case of this donut, but my friend Carla Stickler. I write about her in the book. She was one of my high school classmates, actually, at Interlochen Arts Academy, and her entire life wanted to be a Broadway actress. And she made it. She graduated, went to New York, and for 20 years performed. This is her singing the role of Elphaba, the lead in Wicked on Broadway. Like she did what she set out to do, and she was amazing at it. But as she got to her mid-30s, she started to feel a little bit of friction, more than had been there all the way through. Friction around things like her body. This is an 8 performance a week career. You don't get much time off. And she was really starting to feel that number of shows. She also wanted to think about having a family with her partner and wasn't entirely sure how she was going to manage that with the dancing and the auditioning and the performance schedule that this required. She also, in some ways, was really feeling creatively stifled. That one of the downsides to being an actress is that you only get to make what other people decide you get to make. Casting directors of shows themselves, they choose you for a role, and she had started to become stereotyped in the casting room. She was feeling frustrated creatively. She knew she wanted to start seeding the ground for what new futures might be, even if she wasn't sure what they'd look like. So she started by picking up a hobby. She decided to try throwing pottery, making ceramics. And she loved it for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was really tangible. She didn't realize that how ephemeral theater was actually one of the things that made it hard to really feel like she'd accomplished anything. That having something she could hold and keep and point to was valuable to her. There was also a ton of creativity involved that she got to decide what this thing would look like, even though she wasn't very good at it. It looked a little bit weird. It was hers. And it was meditative. It was quiet. So she thought, okay, this appeals to me, but maybe not this specifically. Let's see what else I might explore that has those same characteristics. And she looked around New York City. She realized that the tech industry had been booming, and she thought, maybe I should learn to code. She'd never really been, quote, a math person while growing up, but thought it was interesting and decided to go take a coding boot camp at the Flatiron School. And she loved it. It had a lot of the similarities that ceramics did. It was tangible. She had complete control over what she made. There was something very meditative and quiet about it. And she started making apps and coding websites in her dressing room and backstage at intermission. Everyone's like, what are you working on? And she'd point to them and say, like, I made this, you know? She thought maybe this could be her next chapter. She wasn't sure when, but it was out there. Then COVID hit. And Broadway shut down for the first time since World War II. And what we thought was going to be a 4-week shutdown turned out to be a lot longer than that, as we all know. And the downside, among others, for Broadway creators, performers, and artists backstage is that a lot of their backup jobs between gigs was to be a bartender or a waiter at a big restaurant that tourists would come to in New York City, which also was closed. So there were a lot of artists in New York that had to leave, not under their own terms, because they didn't have enough money to stay. And they've pivoted to other lives that weren't really what they wanted. And instead, in this moment, Carla realized that she had something that she could pivot to. So we worked together, she and I, and we came up with a resume, a story, an application to help put her out there as a computer programmer. And she landed a job as an entry-level implementation engineer for a startup based in Chicago. What they loved about her, in addition to her being, delightful as a human being, is that while she was a very early junior developer, she had this skill that most engineers don't, which is that Carla is amazing at talking to people. And as an implementation engineer, you're on the phone with clients after they've sold in a deal, you're helping them get set up. This was something that Carla was absolutely skilled in. So she started this career. A few months into the pandemic, she and her husband decided to move to Chicago and go all in on this new life. Then, 18 months later, Broadway reopens, fall of 21. And she's a little bit bummed. She sort of felt like she never had her final sign-off. And then, you may not recall this, but Omicron hits mid-fall 2021. And it wasn't as deadly as the first version of the virus, but it was far more contagious. And Broadway is the job where you're literally spitting in your coworkers' faces. There's no way to wear a mask while you're performing on stage. And so, desperate to keep these shows open, to keep the industry alive, they kept trying to do performances, but the actors kept getting sick, which is why producers started calling up the understudies. And then the understudies got sick. They called the swings, which are the cast members that know every single part. And then they got sick. And then they start calling up people that used to be in the show, which is how in December of 2021, Carla gets a call just after Christmas saying, hey, what are you up to this week? She's like, yeah, I'm a computer programmer. I moved to Chicago. I don't live in New York anymore. I don't perform anymore. And they're like, cool. Can you get on a plane in the next 24 hours? She's like, well, I guess my company is closed for Christmas break. And they're like, great. You have a plane ticket in your inbox. Flew to New York, had one rehearsal for, at this point, a show she hadn't been in 7 years. They paint her head to toe green. They hook her up to the harness. And on New Year's Day, she sings the hardest role on Broadway, flying 40 feet above the air and belting her heart out. And then she gets off stage and she wipes off her makeup and she flies home to Chicago and she tells her team what she'd been up to over Slack, which was fascinating because up to this moment, other than the CEO and the head of HR who had hired her, no one knew about her former life as a performer. They just thought she was killing it at company karaoke night, you know? But she had worried that if they knew about this identity, they knew about this earlier chapter, that they would think less of her in this new role. And then instead, she realized in this moment she could be very publicly both. That by shifting her day job, it didn't make her less of an artist. And by having been an artist, it didn't make her less of a programmer. And that she could visibly sit in both worlds, which is how she's repositioned her public visibility ever since, in such a way that's actually bringing in many, many more artists into tech and to STEM. And so what I love about Carla's story is it highlights where we end up on this, this model, which is pillar 4, flexibility, that you can design your portfolio for the season of life that you're in. And that when the season changes, when your needs change, when the circumstances change, you can rebalance your portfolio. You're not stuck doing something for 40 years because you decided at 19 that that was something that you thought sounded interesting. And I came to this finally in this realization in my own life. I had been working as a founder and then as an early stage executive in startups for a decade in New York City. I absolutely loved it. I was well connected in the ecosystem. I was visible as a woman in tech representing the next wave of entrepreneurship in the ecosystem. I had an all-tech a cappella group. We called ourselves NYC Sharp. C Sharp, the programming language, C Sharp, the musical note. We are nerds. Okay, we're nerds. We sang at VC dinners for the most part. And I traveled the world. This was one of my trips backpacking through the Himalayas on the way to Mount Everest. I decided to do a little bit of yoga, and one of my friends snapped a photo. And I had a podcast where I got to interview people who had built careers at the intersection of business and technology and the arts. Very much a predecessor to what this book became. This life worked for me really well until the day my husband and I decided to have a baby. And in that moment, I realized everything about my portfolio had to be rebalanced. That the friction of the type of parent I wanted to be, particularly in the earliest stages of my kids' lives, was not working with the relationship I had to work and to all of my other hobbies up to this point. And that's ultimately what led me back to HBS. I reached out to Tom Eisenman, who had been my professor, had been an investor in my first company, had written a case on the failure of my first company, which we'd been teaching for 9 years to HBS at this point. And he wanted me to come back and join the entrepreneurship faculty as a season of life where I have complete control over my schedule and autonomy and flexibility that makes it possible to have young children. In doing that, ended up having a second kid while I was writing this book, and have found other ways to keep the arts in my life. Most notably, this musical, Water for Elephants. It opens next Thursday. I'm a co-producer on that. I have 2 other musicals and a play also in the hopper. It's a different relationship than as a performer, but it still keeps me connected to the community, and it gives me that peace that I would feel really lost without. Because ultimately, this is my focus for this season of my life. And having that clarity makes every other trade-off and prioritization so much easier. So that's the model of the portfolio life. I want to offer you a couple of closing thoughts, and then I'm going to pull my slides down. As you think about what this means for organizations, for you as leaders who have teams reporting to you, there's a couple of things to note. The first is that when employees are fulfilled through other parts of their portfolio, through hobbies or side hustles or family or whatever it is that make them feel whole, they do better work and they're less prone to burnout. There's research that backs this up. This is particularly true, I might add, for what I would call kind of shitty jobs. You know, the rote, the mundane, the kind of jobs, if you think Albert Einstein, who loved his notoriously undemanding job as a Swiss patent clerk, because it allowed him to think through his theory of relativity during the day while he stamped papers and shuffled them from one side to another. Number two, when managers can't offer promotions or raises or other sort of limitations, you can think about offering diagonal growth opportunities. Things about lateral rotations, a stretch project, asking your teams, what else do you want to add to your portfolio? Is there a skill or a community, a network that you want to gain experience with? And is there a way that we can give you that opportunity here in your role and not just as you're thinking through kind of side hustles and hobbies and other volunteer commitments? This is one opportunity to offer growth, even if it's not straight up promotions. And three, and this is particularly relevant as we think through what the AI is going to do to the future of basically all industries, but particularly the information economy, your talent model might end up needing to be completely redesigned. You are going to need flexibility as an organization, as a manager. And if you offer flexibility to your team before you need it in return, you're going to find a much more collaborative mindset about deciding, inventing, replanning who you need doing which roles for what the future of your company needs, rather than mass layoffs and then rewriting job descriptions and hiring whole new people. Starting from this mindset of, yeah, we hired you to do this stuff, but what else do you want to learn? And what other opportunities might we have to get that diagonal training and networking while we don't need it, so that we can take advantage of it when we do? I offer you those, and then a final thought on where to start personally as you think through how this might be relevant to you. I tell my coaching clients, my students, anyone who reads this book and wants more details, to start with figuring out what's in your Venn diagram. I offer a very simplified version of mine when I make my introduction. There is more detail in there. But as you think through what are the worlds, the disciplines, the communities, the interests that I bring to the table, and crucially, where might I be able to mash them up in ways that offer really innovative thinking? You can start by doing some self-reflection, working through with your pile of Post-it notes, a handful of questions, not just about what you currently do at a really granular level, but also what you've done previously, what you nerd out about. I think about this as like, what's the section of the newspaper that you always read first, or the corner that the TikTok algorithm might have taken you to? And lastly, what am I known for, or what maybe was I known for back when I had time to have other things in my life? This is one way to excavate the pieces of you that you might have put aside as you kind of grew up and tried to look serious and carve off those kind of weird corners of your puzzle piece. But there's another way. If sort of the self-reflective way isn't getting you much momentum, the other way is to go out, and it's more of an outside-in perspective. It's to go have coffee with your community. I did this after my first startup failed. It was a pretty public failure, a pretty painful failure. And in that moment, I was absolutely lost. I had no idea what I had to offer or why anyone would hire me. And feeling the pain of this failure quite deeply as someone who come from a working class family with 6 figures of student loans at that point, and no backup plans, 0 money to my name. So I reached out to everyone in my network. I ended up doing 70 coffee chats in 30 days, which is far too many. You don't need to talk to 70 people. Also, that's more coffee than any human should intake. But I reached out to them and said, I need your help. Also, I need you to pay for the coffee because I'm broke. I need you to answer these 3 questions. When have you seen me happiest? Like, when am I in my best self? Number 2, what do you come to me for? Like, what is that moment where you think, I should see what Christina thinks about this? And number 3, where do I stand out against my peers? Is there something that I don't even realize as a superpower because it kind of comes naturally, but you actually see it as something really valuable that I could really lean into? I offer you this. I said this earlier. I believe all of us, I know I am, but I believe every one of us is a really strangely shaped puzzle piece. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing that we have all these really unique kind of combinations of interests and skills and networks and insights in the world. The hard part about being a strangely shaped puzzle piece is you don't fit in everywhere. But the upside is that you can find out really quickly whether you do fit in once you truly understand the nooks and crannies and angles and corners of your shape. Figure out who you are, and you're going to faster be able to identify, do I fit in this room? Do I belong on this team? Is this relationship, this partnership working for me? And if not, no judgment, but let's pick up our feet and move to a place that actually wants what I have to offer. Because the life is too short to be miserable. The boomers mock me for leaning into YOLO, but I embrace it. New York Times mocked me on this too. I don't care. You do only live once, and it would really suck to be living someone else's life instead of yours. So that's the portfolio life in a nutshell. I'm going to pull down my slides and open it up to questions and conversation. This is why I asked to do this in a meeting format rather than the webinar. I like to see your faces and hear your voices if you're up for it, but would be happy to hear any questions or pushback you'd like to offer as we have about 15 minutes left to converse.
Well, I'm happy to go first. So it's kind of, there's a reason why I invited you to speak to us, because that little graphic where you show it kind of today and then one line going through.
Yes.
So about a year ago, I've been running tech companies for 20 years, and I also teach at UC Irvine. And my wife said to me, like, you come back from teaching UC Irvine and you're super excited, right? And you come back from work and you like open the fridge, grab a beer kind of stuff. So I decided to make a shift. And so now I left that company, and now I'm doing coaching, I'm doing teaching, I'm doing board work, and I've got this portfolio going. So everything you're saying, I can totally resonate with, and it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more enjoyable. And it's kind of, one of the questions you asked, when you're happiest, is like, yeah, when for me, it's helping other people engage and be better business leaders and doing these things. That's why I like doing with the stuff with the HBS club. So I'm kind of leading that portfolio life you talked about. So I thought I'd throw that as a case study for everybody here.
No, it's a brilliant example because I look at, I have loved so many components of my decade plus as an entrepreneur. I truly love like going from 0 to 1, having an idea and then making it happen. It is amazing. I give you that. But I have never felt, I call it product market fit. I've never felt product market fit more in a job than I have had as a professor. It's surreal. I am a deeply feeling Scorpio who trained as an actress. I cry easily is the shorthand for that. And I have cried in every job I've ever had. And it's not a bad thing. We all cry, but I literally haven't cried in this job as a professor. I love it. I've had hard days. I've had days I want to throw my computer out the window, but I haven't cried. And it took that very visceral realization to say like, oh, this might be more than just a young kids chapter. This might be a longer chapter for me as I think through what I have to offer and why I love being a professor and what I love writing and researching and teaching and advising on. But having that moment where you shift from that like daily friction, where at the end of every day you come home depleted, and then experiencing what it feels like to come home at the end of every day exhausted, definitely exhausted, but energized, is a really stark moment. And I also offer you this because my husband, who is also very much a human Venn diagram, he's a lawyer by training, a public servant by profession, and an actor and a musician and podcaster by hobby, also writing a novel. In any case, he has been in public service for a very long time. He worked for the city of New York for many, many years. And for 6 or 7 years, he would come home every day absolutely just at 0% battery, just depleted. Every day I asked him, how was your day? And every day it was, oh. And then when we moved to Boston for me to take this job, he now runs the town of Brookline. He's sort of their hired rather than elected mayor. And same type of work, same description, but very different context. And he is thriving. So you don't have to shift your job or shift your whatever to recognize if the friction isn't working, to identify what are those attributes of what makes you happiest, where you bring out your best self. One of the key unlocks for him was that in New York, he wasn't the principal. He was the deputy to the principal. So he had to do all of the work, but didn't ultimately get to make the call, which was really frustrating when things didn't work out. And in Brookline, he's the mayor. He's the principal. He gets to make the call. And even when it doesn't work out, it's on his shoulders. And that tiny little tweak to how he thinks through his relationship to work made a huge difference in terms of his happiness. Anyway, I told you I'd let you have questions, and now I'm still talking again. Other thoughts? Yes, Dan.
Yeah, I just love this. This is the most emotional, satisfying HBS presentation I've ever seen.
Thank you.
I'm 82, 6 years into lung cancer, having the best sex of my life. If I go to a play and it's the cast, I get up on the stage afterwards and say, this is the impact. And an actor will say, I'll never forget what happened. So I never wipe tears off. Any other comments about how you help bring out the emotional life in others? You talk about cocooning, and then I think when I cocoon, I go out in the world and put it to the test. And that brings up some more inner material, which I do, and I go out in the world. Any other suggestions and comments?
I mean, I think there's so much that I have experienced in certainly my very emotional life, in my creative worlds, where I realize how much I need to be in conversation with or in community with other people going through a similar journey, that it's very hard to do this work all by yourself. There are chapters of it where you have to go in and think deeply and process. But to go in, hole up, stare at a wall, and think you're going to figure out who you are, what makes you happy, doesn't work. So much of this, I'm actually working on a workbook version of the book that I'm going to release in April, completely free if you sign up for my mailing list on my website. And a lot of it is about, here's a guide to take you through these steps. But step one, find a buddy or two or three who also want to go through this process, and use it as a way to check in with each other, share your readouts, and crucially, get some reflections. Because there are times when you're like, I think I know who I am. And then you put it in front of a friend, your truth teller, I call them, and they say, yeah, no, that's not you. That's cute that you think that that's what you are like in the world. Let me tell you what you actually show up like in the world, right? And you find those people who are willing to give that to you with love, is so valuable. So you have to do this in community with others. Thanks, Dan. Any other questions? Ooh, I see Wendy's going to be at Water for Elephants opening next week. Okay, Wendy, I'm going to text you. We will meet up. That'll be fun. No other questions? Okay, I'm going to answer the question that no one has asked, but is usually the first question that someone brings up, which is, this sounds amazing, but I'm already exhausted. How am I supposed to make space for more things in my life? Great question that you didn't ask. Let me tell you the answer. So it starts with remembering we have seasons to our lives. And there, as you think about the same thing with your financial portfolio, you can always take something down to an allocation of 0%. It doesn't mean it's gone forever. It means for this mix, for this season, you're not investing in that thing. So I am the queen of adding and adding and adding, and it's much harder for me to take out. And I have to do this very consciously. I talk about this in the book as thinking about doing the Marie Kondo method for your home. I do it for my calendar. I gather like things. I say, is this bringing me joy? And if not, I thank it, and then I decline the invitation. And I clear up space for the older folks. My students no longer understand this analogy, but I think about it as defragging, the hard drive. Pull the things together, clear out space, and make space for the stuff that I am prioritizing. And that when I feel overwhelmed, it's often because I'm running at too high of a capacity utilization. So again, in the last third of the book, I talk all about how to put this into practice, because the theory is great, but like, how do you do this? And there's a chapter on each kind of job, whether it's the team around you, the time management, the financial component, all of this. And from the time management piece, I steal from research. I don't really steal. I quote from research on operations theory and high performing manufacturing lines, which doesn't sound like it would have anything to do with your life, but I promise it does. That the best performing manufacturing lines in the world run at 85% capacity utilization. Not 100%, not 110%, 85%, because they recognize that planned downtime is cheaper than unplanned downtime. One way or another, the machine is going to break and is going to need maintenance. That workers are going to screw up and you're going to have to redo something. That a customer who you love is going to show up and be desperate for a rush order, and you want to be able to accommodate them. And planning for that reality is so much cheaper than pretending it doesn't exist and then having to make space for it later. And so I offer you that number as you think through how committed you are, how busy you are in a given week, month, season. 85% is where you should be thinking is your max. And that 85%, by the way, that includes your family commitments, all of the whatever else, like this is everything. This isn't just your job. This is, as I think through what my 2- and 4-year-old need from me, what my husband needs from me, what my house needs from me, all of these things, these are projects that are in my portfolio. These are commitments. All of them together should not be exceeding 85% on a regular basis. Now, there will be weeks where I'm surging, this one among them, but I shouldn't be surging all the time. You can't sprint a marathon and you can't surge at 100% capacity for your life. So think through, what am I going to say no to and what am I saying yes to prioritize this season, and know that when it's time, I can always rebalance what goes in and what else has to go on the back burner. Singing for me right now, performing, is on the back burner, which is really hard, but it's so much easier than committing to something and then being stressed about always breaking it.
How do we sign up?
For the workbook, go to portfoliolife.com and there should be a pop-up within about 5 seconds, or you can go and click on the sign up tab and you can join the mailing list from there. I don't write often. So if you're like, I signed up and I haven't heard from her in a while, that's correct. So that's the upshot. I won't spam you, but you will be the first to get the workbook in entirety when it comes out in April. Chaz asked in the chat, how do you maintain positivity when AI is upending the world of work? Oh, such a good question. So my only way to think about this is we have survived pretty dramatic technological shifts every era thus far, right? We still have reason to put people to work. What those jobs look like and how we train for them has changed, right? So if you think about AI as the same sort of inflection point as the personal computer and as the internet, and maybe even as the smartphone, we are going to have probably 2 to 5 years of a really bumpy transition where entire industries, consulting is the top of mind because I have so many students going into consulting, and also I've been talking with the head of consulting firms who are freaking out a little bit because there are so many new tools, some of which are being created by HBS alums, that literally do what we used to have entire armies of entry-level associates and analysts do, whether it's the Excel modeling or the slide making. What used to take people now takes seconds in a computer. And this entire pyramid structure that consulting firms operate on, where you hire a whole bunch of people, most of them either quit, burn out, or you fire them, and you only need a few to make it all the way up to partner. If you don't start with that giant broad base, if you only need a couple of associates, then you have to construct a job where the majority of them stay rather than the majority of them leave. And if you're not going to see a lot of whittling down from bottom to top, you need to be right about who you want as future partners at the moment you're hiring analysts and associates, right? It's a very different recruiting mechanism, promotion, all of these things. The whole model changes. So terrifying if you are someone who was counting on working your way up the consulting ladder for the next 10 years. And also incredibly freeing when you think about how much that job sucks making slides over and over. I spent 11 and a half months at BCG. No offense to BCG. It's a lovely firm. I hated the job. It was not a fit for me at all. Lots of crying. And it's amazing to think that you won't have brilliant 22-year-olds, you know, being slide monkeys. So it's terrifying and also amazing as long as you feel you've got that diversification. I don't know how the world is going to turn upside down. I just know it will. So I've got lots of irons in the fire. I don't know which one of them is going to be the one that pays my mortgage, but I'm not going to bet the house, quite literally, on any of them. I'm going to make sure they're all working. So a bunch can fail and we're still okay.
Right. I think
We're out of time. Edward, back to you.
Yeah, I think we're kind of coming up on the time. So this was fantastic. Thank you very much, Christina. We really appreciate you taking the time. It's the book is terrific, and yeah, I'm sure a lot of people will sign up for the workbook. So thank you for taking the time. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at the next CEO Forum event. All right, and good luck with the opening of the musical and the play.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Okay, thanks, everyone.